Welcome to The Record on the Road. I'm Mark Maxwell. We didn't have to go very far this week, just across the street from our downtown studios here at KSDK. It brings us here to the Carnahan Courthouse, the 22nd Judicial Circuit, where Circuit Attorney Gabe Gore is celebrating the 2-year mark of his inauguration in this office. He took over for Kim Gardner at a time of turbulence in this office, a time of transition, not just for him, but for city leaders across the entire city. And most recently, a tornado, perhaps upending the work of his office. So we're going to go ask him how he's juggling all those different things at once. You mentioned in the press conference the impact of the tornado and how it would potentially disrupt maybe the work of the court, the work of your office. What have you seen in the weeks since the tornado hit St. Louis?
What I've seen in the weeks since the tornado hit St. Louis is a lot of devastation, a lot of families displaced. I've seen a lot of community spirit, a lot of people stepping up to help and do what they can to start the rebuilding process. In terms of impacting our work, we've yet to see the impact of it, but I do anticipate it will impact our work because, you know, our office, our witnesses, our victims are community members, and I'm sure some of them have been impacted by the tornado.
And your staff. I know you yourself have been spotted around parts of Del Mar and that community. I don't know how your neighborhood is holding up, how you're holding up.
I am holding up fine. My neighborhood, I live in the Central West End, and my neighborhood was impacted, but we are, working together and moving forward. There's a lot of communities that were much more devastated than my neighborhood.
I was listening carefully to your remarks of optimism and an uplifting outlook for the future in recovery from the tornado. I don't want to make a crude analogy, but you inherited this office. One judge called it a rudderless ship of chaos. In addition to all the challenges this office faced, it also strikes me that you came in at a time of great transition for the city of St. Louis across the board. We have a new Board of Aldermen president, we have a new prosecutor, we have a new mayor, we have a new attorney general, we have a new governor, we have a new sheriff. All of this transition, does that ever occur to you? How do you think about this new chapter of St. Louis history as it's being written?
It's I always tend to be optimistic, and I view it as moving forward. I have been very fortunate that in my current role, I've been able to form productive working relationships with every aspect of city government. So everybody's been supportive and cooperative, and I see that continuing. I've had several conversations with Mayor Spencer. I joke with her that we both are graduates of Parkway South High School, so we've got that connection. And she's, I think, going to be great to work with. So look forward to continuing to work with her.
Should I ask how many years apart?
Not sure exactly how many, but I think I probably got 10 years or so on her.
So we're not going to find you the same year. Okay. So there was no high school crossover there.
No high school crossover.
That's a good.
I'm much older, as I'm sure she would tell you.
That's a good fun fact to file away for trivia night, St. Louis trivia night one day. You focused on the surge in hiring. When you came in, you had just, 22 trial attorneys?
22 trial attorneys.
Hired 51. That's
Yes.
73 total. How many trial attorneys do you have now?
We currently have 48, so there has been some attrition over the 2 years. And so that's how we get to the number of 48 currently on staff at the Circuit Attorney's Office. We've got 7 attorneys, 6 brand new law graduates, and 1 young attorney joining us out of a clerkship for a Court of Appeals judge. They're going to be here in October of this year. So at that point, assuming we hold in terms of no attrition, we'll be at 55 attorneys, which will be a happy day in the Circuit Attorney's Office because that'll alleviate some of the stress that our trial attorneys are under.
Hiring up to a head count of 73 and then landing at 48, that means a little rough math in the back of a napkin. You lost 25 of the 51 you hired at some point. That's roughly a 50% turnover rate. How do you explain that?
I think you're doing some bad math there.
Well, you're maybe some of the pre-existing attorneys also left.
Most of Well, I haven't looked at the numbers, but the way it works is I've hired 51, including the 7 coming in the fall.
Oh, so the 7 that are still pending, you're counting them?
I'm counting them in the 51.
So still, it's a 35% turnover rate.
Well, we had 22. We hired 51. I haven't calculated the percentage, but the exact number of attrition we've had is 16 attorneys.
Yeah. Does that speak to the difficulty of a job like this?
The attrition of the 16 attorneys, I can say, a number of, well, some attrition was maybe desired, right?
On your part?
Yes. Some of the attrition was people relocating. When I think about the attrition, I think of maybe 3 or 4 who went to neighboring prosecutors' offices, in some instances for more pay, so that reflects the need for us to be competitive on salary. But the majority of the attrition has been kind of the normal attrition you see in prosecutors' offices, which is people being at a point in their career where, quite frankly, they're thinking, I didn't intend to be a career prosecutor, and I'm going to move on to private law practice, which has happened in a number of instances. So the attrition has not been, there hasn't been a bunch of undesired attrition.
I hear you. And the bottom line takeaway there is that the head count, the arrow is pointing up. So things are getting better. I want to ask you about that pitch to young aspiring attorneys who might find interest in pursuing criminal justice careers. You mentioned that the violent crimes unit is the perhaps most overworked unit in your office. What is that opportunity on-ramp for these young aspiring attorneys? How long a timeline might it be for them before they're working a murder case?
Well, so in answer to that question, I'll say, we've been very successful in recruiting young attorneys straight out of law school. This past year, we probably brought on 8 2024 grads who are now working in our office. And I've hired 7 for the fall. And that was a very competitive process. So I probably received, 3 times as many applications for those 7 positions. So it's actually become a very competitive process, which I'm pleased to see. Speaks to the caliber of attorneys we're hiring. But you're right. You hit the nail on the head when you say that there's a lot of opportunity here for young attorneys, because given where we are, I think as of the fall, when our 7 brand new grads get here, we're going to have 17 attorneys in this office who are in their first or second year in the circuit attorney's office. And that means, by definition, we're going to have some young assistant circuit attorneys having the opportunity to try serious, significant cases much earlier in their career than typically would be the case. And I'm excited about that, because I know that we're going to provide them the support and training to allow them to be successful. But it's a great time for young attorneys to be in the circuit attorney's office. I
want to ask about the backlog of cases you inherited and the work you've done to whittle that down. You've reported in your 2-year report a 33.5% drop in pending homicide cases. You're closing homicide cases faster, it sounds like. Do you know how many of those were resolved through trial versus how many of those were resolved through a plea deal, through dismissal, some other means? The question I'm driving at is, do you have a conviction rate?
So the conviction rate on those, so whether you plead guilty or you're convicted at trial, that's a conviction.
Right.
So the conviction rate on those would be very high. I don't have a number, but in terms of some homicide cases that were pending were dismissed due to lack of evidence. Some were tried, and some were guilty pleas. So that's kind of a typical approach to resolving homicide cases. I don't have the numbers, the exact breakdown of those cases.
But it sounds like your office is interested in gathering and monitoring those numbers, if I heard you correctly.
We are in the process as of, During the budget process last year, we got positions approved for data analysts. When I got here, when I was appointed, there were 0 data analysts in the circuit attorney's office. Nobody was tracking data, which was a problem. That obviously wasn't the first thing we focused on, but when we got the opportunity, we have been focused on that. I think we hired our data analysts, if I'm remembering correctly, probably came on in January or so. And so we've been working through the process of compiling those numbers and tracking those better. So as we move forward, I look forward to having a lot more data available to me to help me manage the office.
Music to a journalist's ears. There are some cities that publish their data dashboards so the public can see it. New York does this well. There are a few other cities. Do you ever envision a future where cases and the progress of your office is just available for the public to see in pretty looking data?
Yeah, well, you know, one thing we did since I've been appointed is we revamped the website because I know that that's an important tool for communicating with the public. It's an important tool for transparency. And yeah, I don't, you know, I'm all about being transparent. We don't have anything to hide about the way we operate. We're a public office, so that information is something we tend to make available.
You said that you're...
I'm very proud of the work that we do here, so happy for the public to be aware of it.
You mentioned that your office is now issuing charges within 5 days, on average, of receiving them from police in 90% plus of the cases that you get. The issue rate was a lot lower when you got here. So your office is agreeing with the cases that and the accusations police bring into your office at a much higher clip. How do you assure the public that that isn't a rubber stamp?
So I think you're misunderstanding that number. What that number says is that in the cases that we make charging decisions on, that we decide to proceed with, we're making that decision within 24 hours, 92% of the time.
So you're not saying 92% of the time you're proceeding with charges. You're proceeding with a decision, meaning?
92% of the time that we issue charges, we're issuing them within 24 hours. So if somebody comes, you have
so
a
that's
police...
not your issue rate?
That is not the issue rate.
What is the issue rate?
That's not a number that I've looked at. It's not a number I've looked at, and not a number that's particularly relevant to me. I mean, when the police officers apply on cases to us and submit the information to us, we as attorneys are going to make the assessment as to whether or not it's a case that warrants prosecution, whether or not the evidence exists to proceed with the case. And I'm focused on the process that we go through in doing that. The issue rate isn't going to help me. I'm not managing to an issue rate, right?
Sure, I see that, but I think the public might be interested in that number because it shows the degree to which you deploy your prosecutorial discretion or the degree to which you agree with police at face value in what they're bringing to you. It shows that tension between the two offices.
Oh, well, it's not a number that I look at. I don't know if we currently have that number. We're in the process of trying to track more and more, accumulate more and more data on how we operate. So I'm not aware of whether or not we have that number. I do stand by the point that it's not a number that's particularly interesting to me, because what I'm interested in is, are we making the right decision on issuing cases? Because if we aren't, that's going to be reflected in how cases move through the system.
Has your office reviewed any police-involved shootings?
Since I have been here, I want to say that we have reviewed maybe, I'm thinking of maybe 2 or 3 that related to incidents that occurred well before I got here.
What were the results?
On those results, we didn't issue charges on either of those.
Were officers asked to testify, or were they deposed or interviewed?
So the way it works on police-involved shootings is that the police department, when there's a police-involved shooting, conducts an investigation. The Force Investigative Unit conducts an investigation. When they complete that investigation, they provide the results of their investigation to the circuit attorney's office. We don't conduct an independent investigation.
And what about any of the police-involved shootings that have happened since you've taken office?
I am not certain of this, but actually I am fairly certain of this. I think, I don't know that we received completed investigations on any police-involved shootings that have occurred since I have taken office, but I'm not certain on that. I know that we haven't completed the reviews on any, but I haven't looked at where we are in that process.
There was a lot of discussion and focus around this idea of a Brady list or an exclusion list during your predecessor's tenure in office. Do you have any officers on a list like that?
So the way the list that existed in the prior administration, it was not what I would consider a Brady list. I think some people refer to it as an exclusion list. It was a list of police officers who, if they were involved in a case, this office was not going to issue. Is my understanding of how it works. We have never applied the exclusion list, and I would have never had a basis to do so because I could not locate any information reflecting how it was that exclusion list was compiled. In terms of Brady, we, on a case-by-case basis, make sure that we are complying with our Brady obligations by having conversations with all of the witnesses in the cases and making an investigation as to whether or not there's anything that might be considered Brady evidence out there. With respect to police officers, we have an agreement with the police department that in the event that we have officers involved in the case and they are aware of Brady information, they will provide that to us and we will produce it to the defense. So we work very hard to comply with our Brady obligations. Anytime I have an all-attorney meeting, I have a habit of the first thing we address at that meeting, no matter what the topic is the importance of complying with our Brady obligations, because I do believe that's something that's vitally important.
We discussed briefly during the press conference with you some of the tensions and controversies stemming from the sheriff's office. I know there's some politics involved in that, but I want to ask you about the practical effects as they might apply to your office. The sheriff's office, among its other duties, secures and stores criminal evidence that can be used in court cases that might affect case files that you have open. Sources in the sheriff's office told us that as soon as he took over on New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, the first thing he wanted to know was where are the guns, drugs, and valuable jewels in the evidence locker. He later learned they're not categorized that way. They're in individual cases as they might pertain to that crime scene. Do you have any concern with how evidence has been stored, secured, or handled in any of these cases?
I have no reason to have concern, and I haven't heard any of the rumors or things that you just discussed. So I have no familiarity with that.
And then I'm sure that you have an interest in safety inside the jail for inmates and detainees who are facing charges. What have you seen there? There's a new jail commissioner, there's a new sheriff. Have you seen any operational changes that might affect the detainees there?
I have not. I'm not saying there haven't been. The jail, I have no, as circuit attorney, I have no responsibility or authority over the jail. I have gone over there and toured. I've gone over there to meet with witnesses, but I don't spend a lot of time at the jail. So I'm not really the person to ask about how the jail is functioning. But of course, it is my desire and hope that defendants being held in the jail are treated in a humane way and are safe in the jail. So that's something that I think everybody wants.
Pre-trial.
Real quick, but we have time for one more question.
One more question, then I'll move on to Chris Dunn. Save an ankle monitor question for later. You mentioned your work in the Chris Dunn case and that it was under appeal. That appeal brought by the Attorney General argues that the state of Missouri would be harmed if it didn't have the ability to uphold what has been shown to be a wrongful conviction. How do you address that question? What harm would come to the state of Missouri if Christopher Dunn his exoneration is allowed to stand?
So from I am the circuit attorney. I filed the motion to vacate because I believed that we had sufficient evidence to show actual innocence. We had a hearing on the matter, which I participated in and handled personally, and the circuit court, Judge Singheiser, agreed with us and said that there is sufficient evidence here to show actual innocence. So my position obviously would be there would be no harm. I think anyone arguing that there would be harm would be someone who doesn't agree with the finding by Judge Singheiser and my view that there was sufficient evidence to find Mr. Dunn actually innocent. So that's just a fundamental disagreement on the facts of the case.
And beyond just the facts of this case, but as it pertains to the exercise of this power, the state legislature granted you and prosecutors like you this very discretion. But the Attorney General has now argued that because you have this discretion, that he must supplant or replace the state in court and become a second layer of enforcer, as it were. Do you see that as an appropriate use of his power?
You know, so my understanding of the statute is it does give the Attorney General the authority and right to oppose a motion to vacate at the hearing. That occurred. We had the hearing in May. Judge Singheiser considered all of the evidence that was submitted. The hearing, I think, went 2 or 3 days, and he made a ruling finding that the motion to vacate was well pled and agreeing with us and releasing Mr. Dunn. I don't have an objection. I mean, I think it's appropriate that the Attorney General has that ability to challenge the matter in court because we have an adversarial process, right? You always want things to be challenged and the judge to be able to benefit from that adversarial process. But, you know, the judge has ruled. We now know the Missouri Supreme Court has said that there is an appellate right for the Attorney General in the case, and now the matter is going up on appeal. We're set for briefing. I think their brief is due in a couple weeks here, and we'll deal with the matter on appeal. I feel confident that the Supreme Court is going to agree with Judge Singheiser's, well, the Court of Appeals, and then the Supreme Court will, if necessary, will agree with Judge Singheiser's finding that we met the threshold of showing actual innocence, and that Mr. Dunn's release will be upheld.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
On our way out of Prosecutor Gabe Gore's office, we noticed a new quote installed just under the door from President Abraham Lincoln. It said, "My purpose in my action is to be just and constitutional." Now, that's not just some slogan that you might have seen on a lawyer's door. That quote comes from Abraham Lincoln's letter to New York Governor Horatio Seymour in 1863. It was the peak of the Civil War. Some of the bloodiest battles were happening in that very moment, and the government was considering drafting soldiers to service. The New York governor was pretty upset with this notion and threatened in quite menacing language the President of the United States, who was fighting to preserve the Union. So Lincoln penned that letter and took the high road. He didn't take the rage bait, if you will, serving as a reminder to, well, prosecutors and presidents alike that the job of public service is duty, not born of revenge or popularity, but duty to the people to whom they swore an oath to serve and protect. That's our version of checking the record this week as we peruse the halls of the Circuit Attorney's Office. Until this time next week, we're off the record.